Welcome to Leading for Life Stories Season 4. I'm Bob Judson. I'm the host for this podcast, and thank you very, very much indeed for joining me. Whether you're a new joiner or a seasoned listener, then I really, really hope you enjoy the mix of content that we provide. The personal stories, the thematic episodes, and of course, the fantastic guest interviews. If you've been with me since the beginning, then I'm enormously grateful for your loyalty and thank you so much. If you're relatively new to the show, then I really hope you like it, and I hope you find all of it interesting and some of it hopefully useful to you. Please subscribe on whichever channel it is you're using, whether it's YouTube, whether it's a podcast platform. That really helps us boost the show and get it over the hills on the algorithms. So if you can do that for me, I would be enormously grateful. But without further ado, let's go. Welcome back, everybody. This week we're doing something different on two counts, actually. The first is that this guest interview is actually being done in conjunction with the Leaders Club. I've talked about the Leaders Club before. I'm the Deputy Chief Exec these days, and it was founded back in 2008 by Steve Fletcher, who's still the Chief Exec and very actively involved in it. And it's a networking group. We essentially meet once a week, mostly online, to have interesting speakers and talk about all sorts of interesting things. And so if you're interested, have a look. It's on www.theleadersclub.org and you'll find it. And it's a really worthwhile organisation if you're into those kind of conversations. It's very interactive, great group of people. We have physical meetings a couple of times a year, and it's a lot of fun. This week's guest featured on the Leaders Club a little while ago in the context of Deloitte, who are corporate members of the club. And we thought she was a brilliant candidate to have both on the podcast and also to do something slightly different with the Leaders Club and do a kind of more in-depth interview on that. So I've done it as a parallel thing. You won't notice that if you're just watching the podcast or listening to the podcast because you won't see the audience. But we had this with a live audience who did some Q&A with the guest afterwards. And the guest is Emily Stone. Emily is a Brightstart at Deloitte. She joined straight from school. She's on a degree apprenticeship program with the firm in the UK, and she'll talk a lot more about that, about the way that whole process works and so on. Now, she's very different to my normal guests because normally I interview people who are much further along their leadership journey, well established, running their own businesses, often in many instances very senior in their own businesses or senior in business. And in many instances have actually got to more or less the end of their careers, and it's about their leadership lessons. Emily's at the start of her journey, so she's in a very different place. But she's also Gen Z, which makes it very interesting because, of course, we're all talking about this intergenerational working thing, and she can give the perspective from the other end of the telescope, as it were. It's a great conversation. I'm sure you're really going to enjoy it. Without further ado, let's get on with it. Emily, it is a delight to have you on the show. Thank you very, very much indeed. I'm really looking forward to what I think will be a great conversation, so appreciate you joining.
Thank you so much for having me, Bob.
No, it's a pleasure. And I mean, let's just sort of jump straight in. I mean, I think many of my podcast guests are further on, as I've said, in their career journey. So having someone who's got such a long time ahead of them in their working life is fascinating. I am going to come back to the Brightstart scheme and talk about that, but I always like to talk about early motivations. It's one of the things I always talk about with my guests. So just give us a few insights into your early life and the decision process you went into before jumping into the world of work.
Really great question. Thank you. And I would say in terms of where my early motivations came from, definitely were derived from the values that my family brought me up with. And there's three key ones that stand out for me that I've identified in myself later down the line, which is about working hard, and usually hard work is going to relate to great outcomes. Trying your best was always something that drove me to, especially in my schooling, to work really hard. And as a result, I was able to go to a grammar school when I did my sixth form education. But I would say the key value that I think is really important for me was about, I was particularly taught it by my dad and my stepmom, which was about having as many options as you can. So by working hard, you don't necessarily have to make a choice, but by keeping doors open for yourself, it means you have more options to choose from as a result of putting that effort in. And I would say that is actually, we'll speak about it a bit more in a moment, I'm sure. But when it came to applying for apprenticeship, it was one of my option doors to choose from as a result of that mindset to just keep as many doors open as possible and not to necessarily worry about what that door that you're stepping through might be next, but to have it there as an option, I think would be one of the key values that I've taken away from my parents and brought into my early careers in the way that I've started work.
Yeah, nice. They gave you some great advice. I mean, one of the things I talk to people a lot about is don't close doors you don't need to close. So as well as keeping them open, definitely not shutting them. When you leave organisations or leave relationships and so on, making sure that you're doing your very best not to shut them down, because I think it's such an important feature of the way we live, because you never know when you're going to need to go back, you're going to need to return, you're going to need to potentially go back and work with with an organisation again or whatever it happens to be. So unless you really, really have to, keeping your options open is absolutely the best thing to do. So couldn't agree more with that. I suspect most people though look at Deloitte and they think of it as a graduate employer, and of course it used to be very much a graduate employer. That's what it did. And I know that in the UK at least, there's still a very strong push for people to go from school directly to university and to have at least one degree level qualification before they're starting work. It was interesting, obviously, literally just the other day as we're recording this, it was breaking that things are changing a little bit. There's now a bit of a downward pressure on university, and less people are going and people are looking at it, and not least I think because of the financial implications and so on. But you're on Deloitte's Brightstart scheme. I would think it would be much better if you explained it than I tried to explain it and mangle it. So tell us how it works.
Sure. I definitely agree with your point, Bob, about that push to the university pathway. I can definitely say that that was my experience as well. When I went to the grammar school, they in their mind success looked like going to university, and there wasn't much of a conversation at the point in which I was applying about actually what a degree apprenticeship might do for you and what options are out there. So it was very self-driven, I would say, into like digging around on websites about what that opportunity looked like. But in a nutshell, what the Bright Start scheme is that typical earn while you learn type program. So while working full-time at Deloitte, you also earn a degree qualification and usually an apprenticeship level qualification as well. And so that would be working full-time at the firm, being treated exactly like a normal employee with the same benefits of an employee, same annual leave, and their wider benefits programs as well. And while it's directed at students who have just finished their A levels, so if somebody already has a degree, it's not necessarily a program for them. But for me, that looks like working on Monday to Thursday at Deloitte in my role, and then Fridays I have off dedicated to do my degree program. And so, and usually I am such a big advocate for it as a scheme, and and it has the promise of a permanent job afterwards. And that's not just I do that within consulting at Deloitte, but it's across lots of different service offerings as well that Deloitte has degree apprenticeship programs across the business.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, if I look back on my own life, I mean, a very, very long time ago, before you were thought of, when I joined the Air Force, I joined straight from school and went in, and at that stage, probably about half of my contemporaries went to university, maybe slightly less actually, and the rest were jumping straight into work. And the one thing as I look back across my time that was the advantage, I suppose, for me going into the Air Force was, of course, I joined at 18. I was in the service, much like you're in Deloitte, at a young age as well. You didn't spend that 3, maybe even 4 years, or even longer if you take gap years and those sorts of things in, doing the university thing. And I have to say, from my personal point of view, I'm not decrying degree level qualifications at all. It did not hold me back one iota. And I think doing what you're doing, where you're doing it in parallel, and you're actually getting a degree, which quite rightly from the sort of work you do would be entirely the appropriate thing to do. It does seem like a fascinating way to do it. Just give us a bit more on how it sort of sits with your contemporaries, I suppose, in the firm. Is there any kind of different feel to someone who's joined as a graduate? Do you feel that you kind of are missing out in some way because of anything that you don't do at university? Is it extra hard work because you're doing degrees, all that sort of stuff?
I would say for sure it would be it wouldn't be right to pretend that, you know, it's easier than a university program, because I would say that it is hard work to do a full-time degree. So it's not necessarily run in the way that a university program will. And if every program will be slightly different, and I can only speak for the one that I'm currently on. But you're at university all year round. There's not necessarily the typical half terms or school holidays, and you have an expectation to perform at work as well as perform at university. It's judged in tandem when it comes to what your work performance looks like. But I would say that when you go into the firm, people are none the wiser unless you tell them that you are an apprentice. And usually, I think in my approach, I always like to set that early doors, because Fridays are my protected time, and people are really great in the firm about leaving you to it. And almost every single person that I've mentioned the scheme to thinks that it's fabulous and advocates for doing it and supports the requirements of what that might look like for me. And usually that might be asking them questions about business areas for a relevant essay, interviewing them for research, or just genuinely just being somebody to soundboard off of, or say, actually, I'm having a really busy university period. I'm going to need to take a step back in some of the extra work that I do. And the firm is really supportive in that regard. But I think you are right in saying, Bob, that it is different from a university program. When it comes to universities, always comes with you get to meet your people. It's got the social life aspect. You move out, and I'd say that it was something that I really had to consider when I wanted to take on the scheme. But I can only speak personally. I could not stand having to live with other people. Knew that I was going to have to commute into uni, because I don't think I could do student accommodations. Anybody on the call who's seen them wouldn't wish it upon anyone, and I didn't wish it upon myself. So I think there is definitely a personal aspect that comes into whether or not that kind of program is for you. I'm happy to talk about that a bit more.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, just tell us a bit more about the degree you're doing. Is it, in terms of what it is, how long it takes, you know, how linked it is with the work you're doing, etc. Because I presume Deloitte are kind of very much into making sure you're getting a work relevant degree, and you're not going off and doing something that is interesting for you but not necessarily relevant to anything the firm does, are they?
Yes. So they decide what your program's going to be, and also who that provider will be. So for me, I'm doing a business leadership and management degree, and that's with Anglia Ruskin University. And I'm doing that in tandem with a Chartered Manager Level 6 qualification as well. So it's two different qualifications. You do your degree level work, which you would expect, and that degree usually finishes in 3 years, because you're doing it all year round and you don't necessarily have the breaks in between. So therefore, you have more time to work as a full-time student. But the degree apprenticeship part is what brings in the chartered manager element to my program. And so alongside doing the academics of a degree, you also have to build up a portfolio about actually where is the evidence of me against what a manager's standards would be. So I have to write up lots of like situation, task, actions about how I've developed this particular skill at work and why that's great for Deloitte. And I would say that most of my essays have to relate to actually the value of said topic to Deloitte. Sometimes I joke that I have a degree in Deloitte, because I now know so much about how Deloitte runs and linking it to all different types of business offerings when it comes to my degree. But I would say that I almost think that academically I am better than I would be because I'm seeing it. It's so much easier to translate the models that you're taught, the theories that you're taught, when I'm like, oh, actually, I've seen that in practice. I see my leaders use that model, or actually, I can translate where I can see Deloitte making this strategic choice into this SWOT model that I have to write in my assignments. So I'd say it's extremely applicable, and more so, I think it's made me even more academically performing and an understanding of the modules as a result. And so the program for me, it's actually a 4-year program. degree finishes in the 3 years, and then in your final 4th year, you finish off your chartered manager level 6, which involves writing up like I alluded to, the portfolio of evidence. But most of my assignments also go towards that portfolio of evidence as well. And then I have to do a presentation, an interview. It's not happened for me yet, as I'm still on the scheme. That'll be happening January next year. But you have the two in tandem, and you can't get the degree without having the Chartered Manager Level 6 pass as well.
Nice. It's absolutely fascinating as a system. I mean, I talk about it quite a lot on the other episodes of the podcast, but I facilitate very regularly at Deloitte University. And I tend to always do senior managers and directors on their programs there. And I vividly remember 2 or 3 years ago now, I think, when the Brightstart scheme was a bit newer than it is now. And we had a senior manager in the senior manager milestone, so in the first year that she was in the grade, who, when we were doing the initial intros around the room of about 30 people from right across EMEA, so a very diverse group, she stood up and said she was a Deloitte Brightstart, which most people then looked at and went, what's that? Because obviously the UK is one of the, I think, pretty much the only country that does it at the moment. And she explained a little bit about what it was, and then they sort of looked more, how old are you then? And she said she was 26. And that certainly made the rest of the room really sit up and take notice that someone who's way younger than all of the rest of them was now in the same grade as them. And I think that's one of the things that you get by having the time that you're in work in parallel with obviously doing the kind of high level education. So it's brilliant, and I'm sure you'll be no exception to that, Emily. You'll be right up there too.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And I think when it comes to the rationale of why I chose that program, it was once again linked into that wanting to give myself choices. It was on a bit of, I don't want to say on a whim, but it was okay, this exists. I'm going to apply for the typical university pathway, but also let me apply for Deloitte and EY. They were the only companies that I knew about. And I looked through all of the offerings and thought, actually, this sounds like a bit of me. This sounds like the job that I want to do after university anyway. Let me go for it. And very quickly, it presented itself as the option I wanted the most. And it comes into that point before about whether or not you're comfortable having that short-term discomfort for that long-term success, I would say. And for me, a huge part to play in that is the financials. It is so expensive to go to university now. And for me, I knew already that would be hard for me to do. I knew that I'd have to work part-time to support what my degree would cost. And then you have the debt that you live with for a period of time afterwards. So that was a huge consideration when thinking about potentially getting on a program that will fund your degree for you and fund your learning. But also at a more personal level is that it was my dream to work in London. I'd always wanted to work in London, and this was the job that I wanted to do, following my ideals of potentially doing a psychology degree, which obviously wasn't the path that I went down in the end. But you can definitely see how that feeds into now what I get interested in when it comes to behavioural psychology at work. But I would say that was my personal journey when it came to making that decision that the Brightstart degree apprenticeship program was for me.
Brilliant. It's really, really interesting, and I wish you the very best of luck with continuing it, that's for sure.
Thank you.
The podcast as a whole is about leadership, and it's really at the heart of what I do. It's one of the reasons I tend to talk to people who are later in their careers, because obviously they are leaders and they're in the organisations, having gone a long way up that ladder. You're at the sort of earlier stage of that journey, but I'm really interested in your thoughts, not least because, as you say, you're doing a business and leadership related degree. What are your thoughts on leadership development at this stage of your career, and what you're kind of observing about the leaders you work with? What stands out? What are the kind of takeaway points for you?
Really great question. And I would say that when I think about the leaders that I see at Deloitte and experience at Deloitte, I would say that you always feel sometimes physically the difference in a good leader and potentially a weaker leader. And when I challenged myself on actually, what does that look like? Why is it that I feel that way when I work with somebody that really clicks with me? And I boiled it down really to three aspects. And I would say that it's when I was in the start of my career, I came into Deloitte not knowing what I was doing or necessarily how working in a corporate environment runs. So for me, I found it uncomfortable sometimes to sit in ambiguity of things and not knowing things. I found really hard, even though it's a part of the journey to not know. And I found that leaders who set really clear direction really worked for me. When I understood where we were going and where I was going, it made me feel like I could fill the gaps. And ultimately, I'm here to try and be as helpful as I can for a team. And when I know where we're going, I feel like that I can provide more value to a team setup because I can try and predict and anticipate what they need from me. And I definitely think that prediction and anticipation of needs is something that I've had to develop. And it wasn't something I had initially at all, but I can see now is something that I really value from leaders when I'm working with them. The second thing I would say is about leaders who are not just there necessarily for delivery, but who are actually genuinely willing to have a connection with the team that they're in and to listen to their team members and get to know each other as individuals. I've definitely been on busy projects where it is like go, go, go. I don't know what's happening. I'm getting thrown tasks and we are just trying to get things across the line. But the best projects that I have been on are when, I know that their son's playing football on Sunday and I'm checking in on how that's going, or we might huddle around and solve an issue together. I think I've always really valued from a leader, and it makes me feel like I'm a part of a team even more so when that's done. And I would say finally is a point about, and I think it feeds into the last point I just mentioned, but about creating great psychologically safe team environments. And I'd say what that looks like for me is being able to ask questions and not worried that it's going to make me look like I'm an incapable person. Being able to get it wrong and be corrected and not feel like the world has ended on my behalf. But also to be really frank about when we all don't know something and be committed to all learning on doing something together or gathering around a table judgment free and just getting stuck in. And I'd say that those qualities from leadership or a way that a team is run, I've always recognized as something that I really appreciate from a leader. I don't know what your thoughts are, Bob.
No, you make some great points. I mean, I think your sort of vision and inspiration point initially, I mean, that's such an important leadership quality that, someone, if you're leading, but all you're doing is actually managing as opposed to inspiring, then you're not much of a leader in my book. You've got to be able to inspire the team. You've got to provide a vision for the team so they know where they're going. You've got to be a people person as well, and you've got to connect with the team. I think it's such an important skill to have, and not everybody does. And that's so certainly one of the things that you can develop. But I think being self-aware, having enough emotional intelligence, looking at reading the room and knowing the people around you, making the effort to know them is critically important. So yeah, those points are super valid. And I think humility as well, being even as the leader. I mean, it's interesting you saying, sit around a table, kind of gloves off, and everyone's prepared to share. That's so reminiscent of my own time, flying, where would come back from every sortie, would debrief it, and there was no rank involved in that. It didn't matter how senior you were. You took your kind of debrief, in the same way as the most junior member of the formation would. If there was stuff you'd done wrong, then you were expected to admit it. You were expected to share it, and everyone gets better as a result. And I think any organisation that doesn't do that struggles to really have the right kind of learning culture. So it's great. And I'm very encouraged if that's the experience you're already getting as well. That's terrific, because when my own time when I was working for Deloitte after I'd been in the Air Force, I found it fascinating to look at not only internally at Deloitte but also at Deloitte's clients, at the different standards of individual and kind of corporate leadership that are out there, and it is very variable. I mean, it's one of the reasons I do what I do now in terms of leadership development, because I think there's such an opportunity to give people better tools, better tips, better ideas to do that. So great stuff. I always tend to ask about highs and low points, and I appreciate it's probably very early to ask you about that because you're very much still on a journey that's going to go for many years yet, and you'll have lots of other high points for sure, and hopefully not too many low points. But high points so far, what's the thing for you that really stands out as a high point?
I would say my high point so far has actually been probably this last 6 months, which is, and I credit that to, I had really enjoyed spending the time on doing the research that I did this year. And for those who potentially weren't at the talk that we had in March, I did a study within Deloitte about different generations at work, what it is that they value, why do they value it, what extent are they getting that from work. And I just really loved doing it. And then to have the opportunity to come to an organization like the Leaders Club, be able to talk with other leaders, present that research, has just been such a exciting period of time. And for me, one of my goals of this year was about making myself uncomfortable at work. And that's a really good example of that, where I'm continuously putting myself in situations where I I don't feel 100%. I feel a bit anxious about something, and each time I'm really seeing how this becomes easier the more that I am uncomfortable. And so I'm really grateful for you guys having me, because this is really, it's really been a high point of my career so far, to be able to come into a room and be listened to and practice in a safe environment, actually being uncomfortable and talking with leaders. And even today, I was very excited for this. Very excited for this podcast. I'm really looking forward to doing it. And I'm not saying it just to butter you up, Bob, but it's the high point of my career. This last 6 months, I've really seen myself grow in it, and that's been really gratifying. I feel I feel proud of myself for doing that.
I know, so you should, and I think the whole concept of comfort zones, stretch zones, and panic zones is really what you're talking about there. And I think you get a bigger comfort zone by stretching yourself. And
Yeah.
if you do, and then things that were previously uncomfortable become less uncomfortable. So no, it's a very valid tactic to do that. I mean, have you had any low points?
Unfortunately, there is a particular situation that comes to my mind as soon as I've came across this question, and that is, I'd say my first 2 years at Deloitte, I was on a long-term project, developed a great relationship with a client, and they were excellent. They worked really hard, and was a really great first project for me to be on, and really lovely person. And very unexpectedly, they became ill, and then very quickly, unfortunately, they passed
Oh no,
while I
I'm
was
sorry.
working with them.
Mm.
And they worked all the way up until their passing. And I remember being so struck by it. I felt so stuck after that happened. I just, it was something that nothing prepares you for that. There's no
Yeah.
handbook to say what to do when someone you work with, you have a sudden unexpected situation. And I would say what it taught me was about being really intentional. So even that's in at work, being really intentional about what it is that I'm doing, and what is it that I'm putting my time and energy on, and then personally making sure that I'm spending time and energy for myself, for my family, uh, for the things that I enjoy doing. And it was I would say it's a lesson that I didn't think that I would learn necessarily early on, but I'm very thankful for, in an odd way, to have had that insane scenario.
No, I'm not surprised to hear you say that. I'm very sorry about the situation, because it's always horrible, and as you say, nothing really prepares you for it. And I think it's one of those things that you do. I don't want to say you get hardened to it over time, but you do get, your familiarity starts to help. You've been there, you've seen a situation, whatever kind of crisis, whatever difficult situation it is, and if you've been there before, it helps, because it makes it easier to deal with the second time, because you've got a kind of different perspective and a different set of reference points. But yeah, that's tough early on to be in that situation. So I know my sympathies with that. You're working for Deloitte. It's a company that sets very high standards, puts plenty of demands on its workforce, and there's no secret about that. I mean, that's true with an awful lot of professional organisations. But I think it's I know the culture well. I know it's very driven. What do you do to kind of get away from all of that and unwind, de-stress, relax?
For me, which potentially isn't typical, is that I'm obsessed with writing lists for things. And maybe it's my way of feeling like I'm in control, but there's something about putting things on paper. I have about probably 20 notebooks that all have different things in it. My notes app is maxed on storage on my phone because I find it really, it's almost therapeutic to get everything down on a page. And when I am overwhelmed, it is my immediate thing to do is to, okay, let me write it down, let me break it down, and then I just feel more self-soothed in myself. And I think that then gives me a bit of brain space. And there is some other more normal ways I do stress. Like I think physical health is really important. I try and get myself in the gym. I find that that is really good for my mental health to move my body and also love to read. But I think a new thing that I've started to do is actually to significantly reduce my time on my phone. This might be a very Gen Z issue, but I am on my phone very often. I was surprised by my screen time. My whole life is on my phone. And I found that actually, if I can free up some of that headspace to do other things I can enjoy, I would much prefer to finish a book in a couple of hours than be on Instagram for a couple of hours. And actually, a really great app, and it's very typical that an app is solving this problem, is called Opal, which restricts some of my apps that I'm most habitual with. I would highly recommend if anyone else is in the midst of loving their phone a bit too much. But I'd say that's my new de-stress, unwind tactic is less phone, more book.
Yeah, the digital detox is so important, isn't it? I think that's for sure. I mean, we're all in that world. I think it's very interesting that even people of my generation say, "Oh, well, your youngsters spend far too much time on social media." And then I look around when I'm in a restaurant or something, and it's all people my age who are spending just as much time on their phones. So everyone's as guilty of it. So no, that's terrific. I mean, you brought the subject up already. I was going to go there. I mean, the whole Gen Z intergenerational working thing. I mentioned obviously the work I do at Deloitte University. It is a topic that comes up time and time again. It's obviously something when we had you on the Leaders Club before that we talked about, and and with a very good panel of kind of intergenerational views and so on. But you are from that generation. You are also in the workforce already, probably seeing people who are joining who are older than you, but joining as graduates, coming in, having maybe spent a gap year and done some time doing degrees. I'm just interested in your perspectives on the whole debate, because it's one of those things which tends to be a bit knock the generation. My own view is, if I look back at my own time when I was probably your age, I suspect exactly the same thing was being said about my generation by the older generation. So, I don't think it's a new phenomenon, but it's just slightly different in the digital age we live in. What are your thoughts?
For sure. And I definitely agree that it's a two-sided coin. There is an element of Gen Z are bringing something that's obviously different and is rattling the workforce a bit with the way that they are currently approaching work. But there's also likewise, maybe there's things to learn from that rattle potentially. But I think personally, in my perspective, I'd say that I don't think that generations are actually starkly that different. I would say that we value very similar things, but it's actually why we value that thing that I think it is what's different. And so, as I've already alluded to before, in the research that I did within Deloitte, I delved into different topics about what people might value at work. And that might have been work-life balance, positive work relationships, promotions, competitive benefits, etc. And I think it was that people value very similar things, but it's the reason behind why that's important to them. It is what differs among generations. And the example I always like to use is about work-life balance. Is Gen Z value it because it's really expensive to travel into the office. millennials might value work-life balance because they're in a life stage where they might have young families, and Gen Xers might value work-life balance because they've got elderly parents. There's everybody's why is different, but I do think there's more commonalities between us about what is important to us at work. But potentially at that leadership lens, I would say that potentially it's a sweeping statement to say now more than ever, but I would say that the expectations of what a leader does now is very high. And I think key things that came out of the research that I done is that generations, not just Gen Z, but millennials as well, are looking for leaders to role model well, to role model work-life balance, to role model those psychological safe teams, to take time for people to learn at work, to take time to mentor people and allow people to go mentor others. And then the recognition point comes in as well, which I think is not just a financial piece there, but expecting to be told that you've done a good job. And I would say that I think overall I've come away with that I think that's an underutilized engagement tactic across the board for every generation, which is the pat on the back, you've done well, that I do think actually people really value as alongside sometimes obviously a bonus is fabulous, but sometimes you also just want to be acknowledged for the efforts you've put in. But I'd say that that's my overall point, is that ultimately I think that it's very easy to group people together and say, actually, this is what this group needs, or this is what that group needs. And I think there is something we can learn from that. There are trends and learnings we can take from it. But at the end of the day, you have to know people's why. And that only comes from connecting at an individual level, to having those open conversations about what people expect from work and what's important to them, that I think unlocks a more engaged workforce cross-generationally. And that's not just for Gen Zers, I'd say that that's for everyone.
Yeah, it's a brilliant answer. I think your acknowledgement point is so valid. I mean, it's one of the things I say all the time, is that the two most underutilized words in the English language in the same sentence, they're often thank and you, because it matters enormously to people, and we just don't do it enough. And I think particularly on a personal level, it's all very well sending out a generic email to the whole team going, well done, you did great. But actually, sitting down by the side of someone's desk, giving them a call, whatever it happens to be, writing them a letter, that makes a huge difference, and is definitely very undervalued and across the board. I mean, that's certainly not a Gen Z point. I think the last point on this really, I think workforce-wise, there is a kind of view that the young generation at the moment are very quick job hoppers. They move around quite a lot. The moment something offends them, they jump jobs and they go and do something else. And there's obviously at the same time, and we didn't kind of pre-rehearse this one at all, in terms of AI is coming up. And I'm just interested in your perspectives on both those things, but also for you yourself, where you see yourself heading, where, notwithstanding your current employer may well listen to this, but where do you see yourself in 10 years' time?
So I think the first point about Gen Z and that kind of job hopping behavior, it's quite interesting that it's been grouped as a Gen Z thing, when actually I'd say those trends started in the millennial era also, with people job hopping. And when I think about, actually, lots of different critics think different things about the why for Gen Z in particular. And that comes into, sometimes, do Gen Z feel stagnant and therefore they move? Do they move because their expectations aren't being met? Or an interesting viewpoint was about difficult conversations, and Gen Z actually really struggle to have difficult conversations, and then rather than having a difficult conversation, will leave a firm, then have that, and then have that situation. But I would say that while the why is potentially not necessarily easy to determine, my own viewpoint, I think I have two thoughts about it. I'd say one is, I think that where Gen Z have been raised with social media, we are exposed to a narrative that you can be a millionaire at 21 if you do this course, start this business, have this Amazon warehouse. It could be you. And everyone thinks they're the exception. Everybody goes into the workforce, and I think actually genuinely if you can engage Gen Z well, they are so into it. They want to get involved. They want to get stuck in. And although without the right managing of expectations, though, Gen Z can end up feeling very deflated when their expectations that Instagram told them aren't necessarily reality in a business. And there is people out there who do it. I'm not dismissing that it happens, but I would say that's potentially an insight into the Gen Z experience, is that you're told that you can have it, and you go in thinking that hard work and you can be the partner in, like, I'll be a partner tomorrow because Instagram told me I can. They come in the attitude is great, but the expectations are sometimes misplaced. And I think that there is a gap there in potentially how leaders are approaching Gen Z, is that expectation management is really critical, because they have high expectations of themselves, and a result have high expectations of their employer too. But I'd say also a second point, and is that the point about the social contracts, that some like to call it, where actually the expectation that employees stay with firms through hard times and the good is actually not mirrored by companies anymore. That quid pro quo, where you work really hard, you have a stable role, and you get a great salary pension. Less than 4% of companies offer packages like that anymore. And so really, when you look at evidence, it says that the more that you move around, you can earn up to 20K more in your lifetime, the more that you move jobs. So I'd say that I think that Gen Z are disillusioned with the idea that actually loyalty is going to create opportunities. Because unfortunately, I don't know if that's the case anymore. Because evidence is presenting itself that the more you move, the more you learn, and move and learn from lots of different people, and move organizations. It's actually to your benefit, rather than staying in a company for a long period of time, who might not have you for a long period of time also. But I think the last point that I know I haven't got to, and sorry, it's potentially a long answer, but in terms of myself in 10 years' time, I would say it's a really hard question. And I think it's a question that I really struggle with, admittedly. And that's because I think what I am in the early phases of my career, and I'm definitely still in that discovery of actually what ladder is my ladder. I'm not sure what that is yet. And I think at the moment, what I am gravitating towards is where I can learn the most, and also where you can earn the most. And so Deloitte right now for me is the best environment. I'm working on different projects regularly. I am learning from different leaders. When it comes to the point of actually me wanting to be a leader, what that might look like, I'm being able to sponge off of actually the really great leaders around me at the moment. But at the end of the day, taking my own advice, maybe that looks like somewhere different in the future. Where I'm not sure what that looks like. I'm just following actually where I can learn, and also where you can earn money also. But for me at the moment, I say in particularly my current passion is to learn the most as I can from Deloitte at the moment about finance, public financial sector companies. I want to do some finance transformation work. That is my peak interest at the moment, to learn the most about that I can from. And who knows, in 10 years, could be in a gilet. We'll see.
Yeah, I think wherever you are in 10 years, they'll be lucky to have you, based on what I see in front of me at the minute, that's for sure. I mean, what about the AI thing, just before we close on and move on to something else? Are you threatened by that, do you think, or is it an opportunity? Or
Great point. And I would say that it's an interesting position, I would say, as a junior person, that I feel that I'm in the sense that you've come into work, and actually leaders are looking at you to know what you're doing, and to be the AI literates, be the proficient learners, be the prompters. But when we've been raised in schools, is you can't use AI, you must do your academics yourself. And I would say personally, maybe I've missed the wave. I didn't really use it. It's definitely been something that came into its peak when I actually was still on when I was starting at Deloitte. But I think it's twofold. I would say that there is an element that I know that my job will go. At an entry level, especially when I think about my role as a consultant, a lot of those early things that I did was creating slides, creating minutes. I mean, my role doesn't necessarily look like that now, but Copilot can do that for you now, and they can do it really well. And I wouldn't say that it's threatened is the right word, but actually rethinking. I think there's work to be done on actually what now, on what it is that you want those new joiners to be learning then, because otherwise there's going to be a skill gap there on actually I was learning stuff because I'm reading the slides and putting it in pretty boxes, but they no longer have that if Copilot's going to whip it up together in 5 minutes. So I think it's a challenge. I wouldn't say threat is the word because it just will change, and I think change is inevitable. In the same way that I'd probably say that when you started work, Bob, that it would have looked different than it is now in the way that we'll approach a way that we go about working. But I think that the new generation are very acceptant of change. I think we've only really lived through things changing all the time, and I think that it's a great group that will take it in their stride.
Yeah,
Speaking for myself.
That's a great answer. Another great answer. I mean, I think you're right. Change has always been there, obviously, and the world of work is very different now to when I started. 100%. I think it is interesting to watch when you listen to some of the real experts talking about AI, though, the level of revolution rather than evolution that it's going to actually be. So only time will tell. But I think embracing the change is really important.
Yeah.
Hey, there's two questions I always ask on these podcasts, and they're sort of quick fire ones just to end with. And the first one is fairly straightforward, probably. But what's the most memorable event of your professional life so far? I'm sure many more to come, but what up to now? What's the most memorable event?
I think that people might laugh, but in my second year at the firm, I had the opportunity to travel for work. I was absolutely buzzing. It was one of the main reasons that I wanted to apply for Deloitte is that mobility piece because they're such a global firm. And you would think, Emily, did you go to New York? Did you go to Singapore? I went to Leeds and I had the best time there. I took the train up with my team, and there was just something really different about the feeling of working with a client in person and face to face and putting a face to a name. Actually, we're all in person around a table figuring out an issue. I just had the best time. And I had my little suitcase. I felt really professional because I was traveling for work, and I had a corporate card, and that felt really cool. And so that always stands out to me, although potentially not super glamorous. Leeds was great. Had a great time there. Really loved it.
Outstanding. I'm sure the residents of Leeds would be very, very happy to hear it. It's great. Yeah. Well, okay. Very last question then. What's the most difficult question you've been asked?
I would say you've probably already asked it, Bob, and I think it is that what's next point. Because I find myself really ruminating on it a lot, thinking about actually how do I be optimized? How do I spend my time the best? I'm always thinking about actually, could I be doing something else? Could I be doing something more? What is it that I want to do? Where do I want to be? Because I have to thank my parents for it, but I believe that there is so much out there that I can do, and that is both a most exciting thing now that I feel like I'm an adult, but also it's really quite daunting because you have to make the choice about what is it that you want to do. And I think that I I get myself excited but also unsure and anxious about actually what is it that I want to do, and tuning into what I want I think is quite hard, with all sorts of pressures and all sorts of advice that you hear, especially the Instagram advice I've already alluded to. It's quite hard, but I think what I've learned from definitely my poor stepmom, Siobhan, has had hours of work chit chat. What do I do? Where should I go? And she is my coach. I must call her out because she is excellent. And And I would say that it's just about that one foot in front of the other. Like I've said, finance is my next thing. I'll learn about finance. If I like it, I've learned something. If I don't like it, I've learned something. And I just am going to keep, I think that's where I'm going to keep trotting along and hopefully learning as much as I can. So yeah, hardest question, but also most exciting question.
No, brilliant! What a great session. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people on this podcast, and some of them have done some amazing things. But it's a real privilege to have someone with so much ahead of them still on the show, and the enthusiasm, the capability you have, which is just awesome. And I wish you the very, very best of luck. I'm sure you're going to be have great things ahead. And when I do another interview with you in 20 years' time, there'll be a very different perspective of where Emily Stone has got to, because awesome, tremendous. Thank you very much indeed, Emily. I really appreciate you joining.
Thank you so much, Bob.
I really hope you've enjoyed this fantastic interview with Emily Stone. I think it was really terrific fun to talk to someone so gregarious, so bright, and with such a great future ahead of her, clearly. And I hope you loved it. If you did, then please forward it, like it, repost it, do all those things, comment, subscribe, whatever it is you can do that helps boost it and get it over the algorithms that often block progress for some of these things as well. If you really did find it valuable, and if you find this content generally valuable, then as I always say, please think about financially supporting the podcast, going via Patreon and doing the subscription side there, which is basically going to join you as either a supporter, a champion, or a patron of the show, various different levels. Won't cost you very much money, even at the highest level. It'll make a very big difference to me. If you're up for that, be really, really grateful to you. But either way, I'm just really pleased to have you as a viewer or a listener, and thanks ever so much. You make the show worthwhile for me doing it. Take care. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.